From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Paris attack.
An act of exceptional barbarism has been committed in Paris against a newspaper. A paper, in other words, an organ of free speech. It's an act against journalists. Today France is in shock, the shock of a multiple assassination, a terrorist attack.
It was a brazen and deadly attack on Wednesday noon in Paris. Masked gunmen shouting, Allahu Akbar, God is great, stormed the headquarters of a French satirical newspaper called Charlie Hebdo and opened fire. 12 people were killed, including the magazine's editor-in-chief and 2 policemen. 1 wounded officer shot dead at point range. 11 people were wounded. The gunmen then escaped in a getaway car. A survivor of the attack said the gunmen spoke fluent French and claimed that they were from Al-Qaeda. This is not the first time Charlie Hebdo has been attacked. Its offices were firebombed in 2011 after the publication published a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad on its cover. Many Muslims consider drawings of the Prophet blasphemous. President Obama condemned the attack as cowardly and evil and expressed solidarity with the French people.
The values that we share with the French people, a belief, a universal belief in freedom of expression is something that can't be silenced.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said brave and decent people around the world would not be intimidated by such violence.
Free expression and a free press are core values. They are universal values, principles that can be attacked but never eradicated.
On Friday, French police had cornered the 2 suspects in a printing plant outside Paris, 2 brothers named Saeed and Sharif Kouachi. A counter-terror unit broke through the door and shot dead the Kouachi brothers. Question: older brother Saeed Kouachi appears to have been trained in Yemen by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Is this attack a wake-up call about the dangers of radicalized Muslims with American or European citizenship returning to carry out attacks? Pat Buchanan.
Well, you got that right, John. Look, this was an act of barbarity, but take a look at it from the standpoint of these 2 brothers. They went in and wiped out this anti-Islamic scurrilous entity which had insulted the Prophet. They avenged the Prophet. They ran a military operation. They escaped. They've got the President of France addressing them, the President of the United States. They go up and they have the attention of the entire world for 2 days, and then they come out like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, walking out shooting, and they're killed in the process. What this is going to do is send a message to all these young anonymous terrorists who go over there to fight that war in Syria or Iraq, and they're going to say, if you really want headlines, if you really want to make an impact, if you really want to immortalize yourself, why blow yourself up in a suicide bombing? The way to do it is in the West. Your question's exactly right.
Relena.
Well, the other side of that is that tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Paris and said, Je suis Charlie, Je suis Ahmed, because one of the people they murdered was a Muslim, and the cartoons that they allegedly object to and find so offensive are now printed everywhere around the world. So I don't know that they accomplished a whole lot. But I think we are looking at a noxious stew, particularly in Europe, where this anti-immigrant sense is really strong, plus an anti-Semitism is on the rise, and how it affects the politics. You've got the National Front Party, which in the past really has been just one step removed from a sort of white French supremacist group, is now moving into the mainstream, and I think Marine Le Pen is trying to bring that party into the mainstream, and if the election were held today, that party would win. And so this is transforming politics in Europe, and the implication here, we've been waiting more than a dozen years for Al-Qaeda-styled mass events to take place. I think this shows how easy it is to stage much smaller events, and the militaristic approach of these young men shows that the training in Yemen, training in Syria, how that has metastasized and really, I think, corrupted the minds of a lot of young men.
At least one of the attackers in Paris appears to have been in Yemen. What does that tell you?
Well, I think that's very interesting because Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has been a group that has lost some attention as ISIS has come into the news media over the past year. But
what's ISIS?
ISIS is the Islamic, well, now the Islamic State, but originally the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham or Syria, Greater Syria. But anyway, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is a very, very capable terrorist group. The leader, Nasser al-Wahishi, is known as someone who is, immensely capable. They had a video last year in the summer where they had a very open parade, which was basically sending a message: the drones haven't got us. The bomb maker, Ibrahim al-Asiri, who is known for very, very good technical skill in smuggling explosive devices inside the human body, but in other mechanisms. And this shows as well that they are broaching into that area of trying to recruit Europeans in a way that goes undetected by intelligence services and push it, again, and as Eleanor points out, it is not that difficult. You have a small group of people who stay off the grid and then go commit attack, and unfortunately we should get ready for more of this.
The U.S. put a drone in Yemen and it killed somebody. Who was it?
Al-Waqi.
Al-Waqi, yeah.
Who was he?
He was an American preacher, extremist preacher, who then went over there to Yemen to join the cause.
What happened before that in his life in Texas?
He was in the United States doing, producing video sermons, and he is a big recruiting source for young, disillusioned men because of his charisma.
Well.
Yeah.
We killed his son as well.
That was an accident.
Well, we killed him as well.
14-year-old.
Yeah, well, that's...
He was in the car, yeah.
But that doesn't
So Yemen figures heavily in this location of terrorists, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's been the case for some time, correct?
It has been.
More so than any other state?
I wouldn't say that. I think Syria now is...
It's the most effective group of terrorists in terms of doing attacks abroad as of now.
Yeah.
What?
Well, we're entering an era, I think, that is going to be very nervous-making, because you have the capacity of people who are willing to die in the most extraordinary ways and to kill a lot of people in the process. And you could shake up the sense of security that we have in this country, and other countries that are essentially Western Democrats are going to experience in their countries. So it's going to be very difficult to stop, and we're going to have to be very aggressive in terms of how we penetrate those groups and get enough intelligence to stop them before they do a lot of damage.
There was an earlier attack last year at a Jewish museum in Belgium that should have been a wake-up call. You're familiar with that?
Yes, but you are right. It should have been a wake-up call. I don't know what it's going to take, in a sense, to get a lot of the intelligence services and the local military and police forces to get on, basically on guard.
John, one of these guys went into the Jewish market before Saturday, who was allied with these two brothers, and he took hostages there, but that's a soft target. How can you defend, every market and every Jewish community center in the country if they're going to go after soft targets? And the problem is, this was a success against a relatively soft target.
Well, in fairness, Europe has lived with terrorist attacks for a long time, and the London tube, the Madrid train, I mean, this is not that new. What is different about this is that it seems to strike at the very heart of sort of French consciousness. The satirical newspaper is not something that I would particularly be interested in reading. I don't think it's all that funny, and I think it's kind of unnecessarily provocative, but I will go to the barricades to defend their right to do it. And I think the French people really feel like their values were assaulted, and they are not going to let this disrupt their way of life. But Marine Le Pen, again, I'm coming back to her, she said, time's up. She wants to return to the death penalty. She wants to close down the borders. So this becomes a political discussion
Let me say this. You've got to ask about that magazine as well. They went out, they insult the prophet repeatedly. They got these lewd, crude cartoons. They know what happened with the Danish cartoon where they had the prophet with the head of a bomb. They know what happened to Theo van Gogh, and they keep at it and they provoked him. And in the Muslim world, I can tell you, below the level of governments, there are probably a lot of people saying those guys did the right thing and going after
and
that.
Those people are wrong.
Cartoon.
Those Muslims are wrong. This is we have a society in which people are allowed to say whatever they want.
But what I'm saying is there's polarization here.
Well, that's too bad for those. I mean, the political culture in Islam. This is a big problem. Now, most Muslims are law-abiding people, but there is this fringe that thinks it's okay, and you see this even with some imams condemning coming out of this public affairs people. There's a person on British News the other day saying it's outrageous, but I don't want to see these buts anymore, and I think it's up to us to say, you know what?
I'm going to add another but here.
You're
You know,
gonna
you
see 'em.
can say anything, but you have to be aware there could be consequences.
Exactly.
And
There were
in this
three-
country, we do have limits on hate speech. And
Well, but
The
not-
attackers were Sharif Kouachi, age 32, in French intelligence files since 2005, 10 years ago in the files. On U.S. no-fly list since 2005, arrest for trying to travel to Syria to join anti-U.S. insurgency in Iraq. He wanted to fight Americans.
well,
Second person is his brother, Saeed Kouachi, age 34, also on the U.S. no-fly list, and at one time kept surveillance by French authorities. U.S. officials said on January 8, that's this week, he trained with al-Qaeda in Yemen.
well,
Hamid Murad, age 18, surrendered to French police when surrounded, no previously ties to a terrorist.
But
he said he had
Attackers
nothing to
claim
do
that-
with
had
it.
nothing to
He
do
had
with it,
nothing
the
to do
third
with
guy,
it.
John.
Look,
But look what it says.
yeah.
These guys went to Earth. They were on the watch list. People looking at them. But they can't keep watch on everybody
Right.
every day.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so they plotted and planned quietly and carried this
Yeah,
out.
And,
These-
and the French
these-
will go through what the U.S. went through. There will be a sort of a 9/11 commission that will look at every bit of this and to see where they fell down. But Pat's point is well taken. You cannot keep tags on everyone who seems suspicious.
Yeah, well, how many people are there that the FBI and our other surveillance authorities in this country are watching? How many are there out there approximately? Do you know?
hundreds.
100.
Well, there's
No,
hundreds.
over 100.
There's
Many,
a number
many.
have gone to Syria and Iraq. But
My figure is 100.
There are thousands in the UK and Europe.
I mean,
and
that
the
we-
that we are concerned about. And so you have three threats. You have the number one, you have the original people with Al-Qaeda, we've seen before, who were operated by. Then you have number two, you have people coming back from Syria who have trained, who have gone there, like as appears with these people with Yemen. And then you have number three, people who have watched online on YouTube and been inspired and decided, I can become a terrorist. And they do.
What, John, we have seen for 48 hours, we have been riveted to that television all over the world, and they've done it, these people coming back. And what frightens me to a degree is that, look, these guys succeeded. I mean, they are really...
Their faces will be forgotten in 3 days.
Their
And
names
will be
triggering revulsion.
Well, revulsion
these tactics
inspiration
will not
by
succeed
jihadists.
over
What
the
about
long-
their people rather than our people? You got to see what they think
Their-
about
How
this.
many-
Their people, there are a lot more
Excuse
of their
me.
people who don't believe in those tactics than
We
what
don't
they've
need a
done.
lot.
All right, excuse me. How many European citizens from Muslim immigrant communities are estimated to be fighting alongside ISIS? What's ISIS?
The Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria now.
The Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria, ISIS,
Yeah,
right.
now, yeah.
Alongside ISIS or ACAP. What's ACAP?
Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula.
Correct. How many are there?
How many what?
How many
mentioned
are
1,000 or
estimated?
something like Great-
European authorities
Thousands.
estimate as many as blank European jihadists are fighting alongside ISIS and ACAP in Syria and Yemen.
Thousands.
How many?
Thousands have
5,000.
gone and come back.
5,000.
They've gone and
5,000.
come back.
Yeah, and how long is it going to be before one or two or half a dozen or a dozen or 100 of those come over to the United States?
That's the issue they're worried about. How long is it going to be until a British passport holder gets on a plane, smiles at the customs guy, goes into a gun store and starts shooting
Has
Americans?
that happened already in Britain?
No.
No.
But they're back. They've been
Right.
plotting, and they've arrested people who've
John,
been to
even-
Syria to try and do
John,
things.
take
How many
a-
have they arrested in Britain?
They've arrested a lot who've traveled, probably around 50 now, but I think the
They're-
active plotters is about 5 to
Does
10.
one
revoking passports.
passport work in another jurisdiction?
Well, that's the problem, that you have a British passport. It's easy to get in the United States.
But those London bombers, as I understand it, were homegrown Brits.
yeah.
Second generation people, John. Like these guys, I think, are second generation in Paris.
Issue 2, Dynasty. Jeb Bush has formed a presidential exploratory committee. And he's resigned from corporate boards and committees. And he's released emails from his tenure as Florida governor. Jeb is showing more than ankle. He's bearing knees and hips. If Governor Bush does run, and if he wins the Republican nomination, and then wins the general election, he'll make history as the third Bush to become president of the United States. A big deal? No. The Bushes are a dynasty, and dynasties run in America's DNA. Notable examples include the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, the Clintons, the Browns of California, the Cuomos of New York, the Nuns of Georgia, the Pryors of Arkansas, and the Bushes.
Question: if Jeb Bush runs, is he an instant front runner for the GOP presidential nomination? Eleanor.
He's already the front runner, and he's smart to have made his move early, because in today's Republican Party, there's only room for sort of one sane character. He's considered moderate. He's run a state for 2 terms. He can raise money, which is really key. And I think the last name Bush is not going to hurt him as much as people might think.
Name identification.
I think we live in a world of branding, and I think the American people, they know the brand, and they're comfortable with it. So I think if he runs, he has a good shot to win.
So he's got name, and he's got the Bush political network. What do you think?
He certainly has all of that, but he has something else that I think is much more important than any of these things. He's got real talent. This man is was an extraordinary governor. He's an extraordinary speaker. I happen to have attended a meeting that he had just 2 days ago, and he was phenomenal. I mean, there were 100 people there, all frankly helping him out financially, but he was phenomenal, and everybody in that room knew it. He answered question after question without knowing what the questions could be. He's totally informed about the issues facing this country, and he's not a right-winger in the Republican Party nominee.
Why did you gesture toward me there, Mort?
I don't know, my arm. I have a sore shoulder pad. It couldn't go any further.
He made a very smart move, moving early. Yeah. He has bulled both Chris Christie, who's another candidate for the establishment title, if you will, and Mitt Romney have got to move pretty soon if they're going to get into this thing. And he may have cleared the field, and if he does, John, he at least gets to the finals, I think, because I've always believed the establishment winds up with one candidate in the finals, and the outsiders, the populists, the conservatives, whatever you want to call it, libertarians, they get a candidate.
Is it a blessing or a curse to be front runner?
It is. It's both. I mean, it's a blessing because you're going to get all this money coming to you.
Is it more a curse than a blessing?
Well, the front runner usually gets chopped up bad in the
There's
Republican
more press coverage to the front runner.
He gets chopped up. Dole was chopped up.
Right.
They're conservative.
That's what happened to you when you ran for president.
I was never the front runner.
And otherwise, you'd be president today, wouldn't you? You ran twice.
3 times.
Right.
3 times.
Well,
they're conservative. The conservative
presidential
activists.
obsession. My new book on you.
I don't have a dynasty either.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think the conservative activists, though, the problem for Jeb Bush is that he is unpopular because of Common Core, which is an education federal thing, federal mandate for, and so conservative activists have a problem with him.
All right.
And immigration.
Let's see a little bit more about Bush from videotape. Who is Jeb Bush? Here's who.
Born 1953, 61 years of age, bilingual, fluent in Spanish, religion Catholic. Married, 1974, 41 years. Wife COLUMBA, a Mexican-born U.S. citizen. 3 children, Noel, Jeb Jr., and George. Son George is the Texas Land Commissioner, responsible for managing billions of dollars in state assets and mineral rights. Jeb's work history, banking, real estate, entrepreneurial ventures, and, of course, governor of Florida, 2 terms, 1999 to 2006.
Question: regardless of his last name, does Jeb Bush's previous experience qualify him for the Oval Office? Tom Rogan.
Yeah, I think it does if we look at previous presidential candidates in comparison. But ultimately, the question of qualifications, I think, becomes, any candidate can have the qualifications if the primary voters like them, and that's going to be the
2 terms as governor under
and he has a business experience.
An exciting case.
He's intellectually curious. He speaks Spanish.
If you're interested in that, what's the problem of the current governor down there, who's going to have a 2nd term, but is a figure of what? Contradiction in a way.
John, he's got the experience, he's got the credentials for president, no doubt about it, but you mentioned immigration, you mentioned Common Core, and there's a sense on the part of an awful lot of conservatives that he is the moderate candidate who's going to be put up as McCain was and the others were. And frankly, some of them are going to go after him very, very hard. We're going to see what he's made of.
Is he not eminently qualified?
I'd put qualified under the ABA.
I think terms as governor in Florida.
Well, that's plenty of time.
What else? What else? What else?
Part of a family that's been involved for years.
He knows all the issues. He understands all the issues like no other candidate that I've heard in 20 years.
He can answer questions when he doesn't even know what the question is going to be.
Excuse me.
Couldn't resist that.
Yes. Well, thank you. I
think his biggest
challenge, me for a lot of
his biggest challenge is that he hasn't been in the arena for 10 years.
Right.
He's rusty. He's not a charismatic
and
campaigner.
Ted Cruz is going to go.
How much of the non-aligned voters in America will Bush be able to carry? Non-aligned.
At one point, last year, Bush, there were 49% or 50% of the country said they wouldn't vote for another Bush. He's got a problem to overcome in a general election.
In the latest poll, he's 6% ahead of the next Republican
that's not much
in the
more.
party. I'm not saying it's much. It's better than any other place to be.
Right.
First place is always up, from my experience.
There's only room for one mainstream establishment candidate, and if he's the only one, he's got a good chance at getting a plurality.
Unlike hero President Obama, Bush has experience.
President Obama is doing
pretty well, thank you, John.
That shows you, John, an outside candidate who doesn't have those credentials can win. It's tougher in the Republican Party.
Words to live by. Issue 3. Peña Nieto in Washington.
It is a pleasure to welcome once again President Peña Nieto as well as his delegation. It's appropriate that our first meeting of the year is with one of our closest allies, neighbors, and friends.
President Obama welcomed the leader of Mexico this week, President Peña Nieto, to the White House.
Thank you very much.
But while the body language was warm, the conversation was deadly serious.
Our commitment is to be a friend and supporter of Mexico in its efforts to eliminate the scourge of violence and the drug cartels that are responsible for so much tragedy inside of Mexico, and we want to be a good partner in that process, recognizing that ultimately it will be up to Mexico and its law enforcement to carry out the key decisions that need to be made.
Scourge of violence is how President Obama describes the war between drug cartels and the government of Mexico. The United States has spent billions of dollars to support the Mexican government in this violence abatement. The number of Mexicans who have lost their lives in this crime war since 2007 is over 100,000, climaxing in September with the kidnapping and murder of 43 male college students by a drug cartel believed to be collaborating with corrupt Mexican officials.
Question: should the Obama administration be doing more to support Mexico's government against the drug cartels, or is this a Mexican crisis that requires a Mexican response exclusively? Mullet Zuckerman.
Well, I think there are things that we should do together, particularly exchanging information and intelligence. But I don't think that America should get involved directly in what's happening on Mexican soil, nor do we think the Mexican Army or their other law enforcement agencies should get involved in on American territory. But it is really critical that we have full exchange of intelligence, because that's where each could help the other.
U.S. operatives wear Mexican Marines outfits to penetrate the cartels in Mexico. Do you think that's a good idea?
I have no problem with it, frankly, because unless it's American soldiers who are doing that, or American law enforcement officials. They're wearing American uniforms.
They're wearing the uniforms of Mexican Marines.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
have been involved in direct operations against cartels. Do you think that's an over-involvement, or do you think we should be there?
No, I think we have to do that. It is a direct threat to the United States. All this drug traffic is a very important issue that we have to cope with. Right. This is one of the things we can do. I'm totally in support of it.
Yes, how big is the traffic? How much is unloaded on the United States of drugs from Mexico?
I don't know the exact number, except it's a very large amount.
Yeah, and it's a penetrating route. It doesn't just stop at the border. It goes up and up and up and up.
They're one of the, maybe the principal supplier of drugs to the American population.
Yes, and we have to acknowledge that we provide the demand. And so this is a joint operation, if you will. And so I think the involvement is correct. But the corruption in Mexico is so extreme that, you know, when the police can't be dealt with, they bring in the army, and it turns out the army is infiltrated as well, because the big money is all in drug trafficking. So the U.S. can't solve that alone, but the Mexicans need our help.
43 teacher college students were slaughtered, all boys, in Mexico. We still don't know what happened.
Well, right, and this is the issue. We have to be involved to some degree because we have idiots, unfortunately, a lot of them in my generation who think it's cool to go and use cocaine and it's something without consequences, but it does have consequences. The massacre of many Mexican innocent people, like those innocent kids. And look, we have to be involved, but there's also hope. COLUMBA proves, 1980s, huge amounts of corruption, assassinations of attorney general after attorney general, and today, COLUMBA is in incredible shape. Growing economy, stability, they've beaten the FARC, and that was American help for the long term. The FARC, with Colombia Marxist rebels.
We don't have a
long-term commitment. Smashed
We don't have a 2,000-mile border with Colombia. Let me tell you, in the 21st century, as we move along, the United States isn't going to be hanging around over in places like Iraq. The central problem of security and other things for this country is going to be right in this hemisphere, and it's going to come right out of Mexico, a country of 120, 130 million people.
Is Pena being linked to the cartels by his opponents, political opponents?
Well, you know, I don't know the truth. All these charges, a number of these Mexican presidents, charges have been made about them, but the corruption is pandemic in Mexico.
Right. Predictions, Pat.
Major Hill battle over fast-track authority for Obama.
Eleanor.
Jeb Bush will sew up the major GOP donors by spring.
Tom.
Very regrettably, I believe there will be another terrorist attack in Europe in the next few months.
Mort.
Jeb Bush will be the Republican nominee for the presidency.
I predict the House and Senate will pass legislation approving the Keystone XL pipeline as promised. President Obama will veto it, but his veto will be overridden with the help of a small block of Senate Democrats. Bye-bye.
Looking for these? You drive buzzed. It could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.